Before we get started, YouTube analytics shows that only 40% of my viewers are subscribed to the channel. Subscribing is free and helps me out immensely, so please know it's very appreciated. I hope you enjoy the video. I moved cautiously through the woods, the damp earth muffling my footsteps. The shortcut I was following had been a lifeline for me and my friends in better times. A hidden path winding through the dense trees, leading straight to the old bridge. We used to play soldiers here using sticks for rifles and tin cans for grenades. Tommy's uncle, a grizzled veteran, would regale us with tales of his time in the army, turning our games into a kind of boot camp. I paused, leaning against a tree as the weight of everything pressed down on me. How long had it been? How many hours have passed? I couldn't be sure. My phone was dead, and the pitch-black sky showed no sign of dawn breaking anytime soon. It was fall, and the nights lingered longer, colder, and darker. The chills seeped through my soaked clothes, making me shiver as I gripped the revolver tightly in my hand. That's when I heard it. Faint footsteps ahead. I froze, crouching low behind a cluster of bushes, my breath slowing. Squinting through the darkness, I spotted the figure of a man silhouetted against the faint glow of a flashlight beam. It was an officer, clad in standard-issue gear and holding a rifle at the ready. My first instinct was relief. Help, finally. But then I hesitated. My gut churned as I recalled the janitor's cryptic warning. The officer's voice crackled through the silence, speaking into a walkie-talkie clipped to his shoulder. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was calm, almost casual. I watched closely as the officer turned slightly, revealing a youthful face. He looked barely older than me, early 20s at most. A rookie, I guessed. Heart pounding, I decided I needed answers. If the janitor's vague warnings had any truth to them, I couldn't risk walking away. Gripping the revolver firmly, I began to move, inching forward as silently as I could. I avoided twigs and dry leaves, moving with a focus I didn't know I possessed. This is it, I thought. Play soldier. When I was close enough, I stood upright and leveled the revolver at the back of the officer's head. The click of the safety being pulled back broke the stillness like a thunderclap. "Don't move," I ordered. The officer stiffened, his body going rigid. The flashlight fell to the ground, casting erratic beams of light across the forest floor. "Tell your buddy on the walkie that everything's fine," I demanded. The walkie-talkie crackled again, a voice on the other end saying, "Jay, you good?" I pressed the barrel of the revolver against the back of the officer's head, my grip tightening. "Answer him," I hissed. "Tell him you're fine. Now." The officer, his voice trembling, reached for the walkie-talkie slowly. "I'm fine," he said, forcing steadiness into his tone. "I thought I saw something, but all good." The voice on the other end paused for a moment before replying. "Copy that. Stay sharp, boy." The line went silent. I exhaled, my mind racing. "Drop the rifle slowly." The officer complied, lowering the rifle to the ground with deliberate care. I kicked it out of reach, my eyes never leaving him. "What's going on?" I asked. "What the hell is happening out here? Why is everything falling apart?" The officer turned his head slightly, enough for me to catch a glimpse of his pale, frightened face. I don't know much," he stammered. "I swear, man, I'm just following orders." "What orders?" I barked. "They don't tell us everything," the officer pleaded, his voice breaking. "The mayor just told us to secure the area and to bring everyone to the safe zone. That's all I know. I didn't sign up for this, I just wanted to do my job. Now it's all gone to hell." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I want it to be over too, man, I swear." I stared at him, searching his face for any hint of deceit. The guy looked genuinely terrified, his fear mirroring my own. For a moment, the two of us stood in silence, the rain pattering softly around us. I lowered the revolver slightly, though I didn't let my guard down. "All right," I said finally, "just don't tell on me." "Huh?" Before the rookie could react, I swung the butt of the revolver, striking the side of his head. The officer crumpled to the ground with a soft groan. I crouched beside him, checking to make sure he was just unconscious. The guy was breathing steadily, though a welt was already forming where the revolver had struck. I grabbed the rifle and slung it over my shoulder. I picked up the walkie-talkie, hesitating for a moment as I considered whether it might lead to more trouble. Deciding it was worth the risk, I clipped it to my belt. Every tool counted now. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, glancing down at the unconscious officer one last time. I then stepped over him and continued through the woods, moving swiftly but carefully. The bridge wasn't far now. I pushed forward, my mind set on reuniting with everyone, and on whatever answers lay ahead. I trudged down the muddy hill, my legs aching from exhaustion, the rifle slung over my shoulder weighing me down. The faint outline of the bridge appeared through the mist and rain, a small glimmer of hope. Relief began to seep into my tired muscles, but as I reached the bottom of the hill, the sight that greeted me froze me in my tracks. My friends were all on their knees, hands clasped tightly behind their heads. The school bus loomed behind them, its yellow frame streaked with dirt and rain. Two officers stood a few feet away, rifles slung across their backs, their voices raised in a heated argument that I couldn't make out over the sound of the rain. My eyes darted to Ashley. She was standing, her posture defiant, arms crossed over her chest as she faced the officers. Even from the distance, I could see her lips moving, arguing back, her voice cutting through the tension. I crouched low, my heart hammering as I observed the scene. What the hell was going on? I adjusted my grip on the rifle, creeping closer to get within earshot. "You don't understand." Ashley's voice was fierce, her words sharp. "I need to speak with my dad. He's the sheriff. He'll tell you this is all a mistake." One of the officers, a burly man with a shaved head, shook his head firmly. "We've got orders to detain anyone we find. We're not going to hurt you, Miss Prescott. Your father told us to keep you safe." Ashley's voice rose, unwavering. "Keep me safe. I was home alone all night." "I don't believe a word you say." I clenched my jaw, my blood boiling at the sight of everyone being helpless. I couldn't stand by any longer. I reached for the walkie-talkie I had taken earlier. I pressed the button, keeping my voice low but firm, mimicking the officer's tone. "Unit 4, we've got movement near the perimeter. Possible hostiles. Check it out as soon as possible." I released the button, my voice echoing faintly from the other officers' radios. Both men stiffened, the one with his hand on his sidearm instinctively grabbing the device on his vest. "What the hell, that's not from our unit," he said, looking around sharply. I seized the moment of confusion. I raised the rifle, aiming for the more burly officer first. My hands were steady, fueled by desperation and determination. I fired, the sound cracking through the rain-soaked air. The shot hit the officer square in the shoulder, knocking him to the ground with a pained yell. "Get down!" I shouted to my friends, my voice cutting through the chaos. The other officer whirled around, his rifle coming up, but I didn't give him a chance. I fired again, this time grazing the man's leg. The officer dropped his weapon, clutching his thigh as he fell to his knees. I sprinted down the hill, keeping the rifle aimed on the men. My friends scrambled to their feet, Kev and Tommy immediately rushing toward the dropped weapons. "Casey!" Demi cried, running towards me, her face a mix of relief and fear. "Not yet!" I barked, keeping my focus on the officers. The injured officer groaned, glaring up at me. "You have no idea what you're doing, kid." "Neither do you," I spat, stepping back to join my friends as they armed themselves. The second officer raised a hand. "We didn't want to hurt them, okay? We're just following orders. You don't understand. This isn't what it looks like." "Then make me understand," I shouted back. The officer opened his mouth but hesitated, his eyes darting to his partner. "It's the mayor's fault, that's all I can say." For a moment there was only the sound of the rain, when all of a sudden Greg grabbed the pistol from the officer's holster. "Like hell, that's all you can say," Greg snapped, pointing the sidearm at the officer. "Greg, stop," Claire shouted, grabbing his arm. "We need to go now." My eyes flicked to the woods. The distant sound of groans and screeches carried on the wind, faint but unmistakable. Lurkers. "Let's move," I said firmly, pulling Demi along as we all hurried to the bus. I kept the rifle aimed at the officers as they backed away. Once everyone was on board, Greg floored the gas, the bus rumbling forward toward the bridge. The school bus rumbled down the rain-slicked road, the interior lit faintly by the weak glow of overhead lights. Our group sat scattered across the seats, everyone's faces marked with exhaustion and tension. I leaned back in my seat, Ashley sitting beside me with her head resting against my shoulder. The revolver I'd taken was tucked securely in my waistband, while the rifle rested on the seat next to me. "So," Kev broke the silence, looking over at me. "What the hell happened while you were off playing action hero?" I rubbed the back of my neck, trying to organize my thoughts. I ran through the woods, made it to the power plant, and managed to distract the lurkers enough to double back and make a break for the bridge. "Lurkers in the rain," Tommy muttered. "Sounds like a movie title." I shook my head. "Wasn't as fun as it sounds." Anyway, I ran into this rookie cop near the bridge. He was talking to someone on a walkie-talkie, and it sounded like, I don't know, like they were working together to round people up. He didn't know much, but he mentioned they were supposed to bring everyone to a safe zone. He didn't say where, though. "Safe zone." Claire leaned forward. "What does that even mean? Are they trying to help people or control them?" Demi interjected, her tone grim. "They had us all on our knees with guns pointed at us. That doesn't scream safe." Greg nodded, gripping the steering wheel tightly as he kept his eyes on the road. "When they stopped us, they kept going on about orders. They didn't even tell us where they were taking us, just that we had to comply." "And you?" I glanced at Ashley. Ashley straightened up, her voice calm but firm. "They said they wouldn't hurt me because of my dad, but when I pushed them to let all of us go, they just dodged the question. It's like they were scared of disobeying orders." We all fell into a brief silence, the weight of the mayor's involvement sinking in. "It all comes back to that house," Wes finally said, his voice tense. "Why did everything start there, and what exactly happened on the third floor?" "Not to mention our parents," Claire said softly. "No one's been able to reach them except for Tommy's uncle. And my mom isn't exactly the type to just disappear." Tommy crossed his arms, staring at the floor of the bus. "My uncle's the only one who ever had beef with the mayor. Always told me the guy was bad news, but he never really got into why. Just that he hated him enough to leave town and hole up on the farm after my aunt passed. Maybe he knows something." "We're sure as hell about to find out," I said, glancing at Greg. "How much further?" "Not long now," he replied, his knuckles white as he gripped the wheel. The tension in the bus lifted slightly as Kev leaned back and cracked a grin. "Well, this sure beats sitting in a basement all day. I feel like we're in some Netflix apocalypse movie." Tommy smirked. "Yeah, Apocalypse High, starring us as the unlucky seniors who just wanted to graduate." Can we not jinx it? Claire muttered, rolling her eyes but smiling faintly. You know what's missing? Wes said, leaning back in his seat. A good soundtrack. Somebody grab their phone and play something. Wes, the world's ending. Priorities, Demi quipped, though she let out a small laugh. The banter, however brief, helped ease the tension as the bus continued its trek down the winding road. The jokes faded as the lights of Tommy's uncle's farm came into view, the large house and barn silhouetted against the faint glow of the horizon. Greg slowed the bus, pulling it to a stop near the driveway. Tommy stood up and grabbed his rifle from his seat. All right, let's see if Uncle Dale is ready to share some secrets. I hope he's all right. We climbed off the bus, our shoes crunching against the gravel as we approached the front door. I took a deep breath, looking around the eerily quiet farm, and prepared myself for what we might uncover. Tommy rapped his knuckles against the weathered wooden door. We heard the shuffling of feet inside before a gruff voice called out, "Who's there?" "It's me, Uncle Dale, it's Tommy," he replied, his voice firm but edged with urgency. The door cracked open, revealing Uncle Dale standing there with a shotgun. His eyes flicked over us, taking in our weary faces and muddied clothes. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "Get in here before you freeze." He swung the door wide, letting us file into the warm, dimly lit living room. The smell of stew lingered in the air, and a fire crackled in the hearth. Uncle Dale motioned toward the dining table, where a pot of food and a loaf of bread sat. "Y'all look like you've been through hell. Grab a bowl, help yourselves to anything in the fridge too. Make yourselves comfortable." We all sat down, hesitant at first, but grateful for the warmth and sustenance. Uncle Dale leaned against the wall, his shotgun resting by his side, watching us. He seemed calm, almost oblivious to the storm raging in our hearts and minds. Tommy started to explain everything we'd been through, his voice steady but tinged with fatigue. It all started at that party, apparently. Everything seemed fine until, well, it wasn't. Demi chimed in, her tone more direct. We were inside that creepy-looking house when people turned into something else. We saw it happen. 1 second they were normal, then black veins, glowing eyes, claws. We've been calling them lurkers. Uncle Dale shifted uncomfortably but said nothing, letting us continue. Kev, poking at his stew with his fork, added, "It's not just that. It's like the whole town just went dark. Phones barely work, roads are trashed. We've seen wrecked cars, abandoned houses. And these lurkers, they keep coming but they're changing. They're getting worse." Tommy looked at his uncle, his expression almost pleading. "We've been running and fighting all night. We barely made it here. Uncle Dale, you know what's going on, please tell us." Uncle Dale took a deep breath, his hand tightening on the doorframe. "Eat up," he said gruffly. "Get some rest. I'll explain." We all exchanged uneasy glances but followed his advice. For a few moments, the only sound was the clinking of silverware and the soft hum of the rain outside. Once we all settled, Uncle Dale finally spoke, his voice low and almost hesitant. "I've dreaded this day. I knew it would eventually come." He shook his head as if trying to push away the weight of his thoughts. "You kids deserve to know the truth, even if it's the last thing you'll want to hear." The room went still. "You know the mayor of Clearbrook and I, Henry Kane. We grew up together. We were like brothers back then, running through these woods getting into trouble. His family was always well off, a big name in this town long before Henry became mayor. The creepy house you mentioned, that was their family home, standing tall and eerie even back then. I never liked going there, not because of their Rottweiler or the fact that his mother wouldn't let us drink soda. It was because of Lydia." "Lydia?" Tommy asked, breaking the silence. Henry's grandmother, Uncle Dale replied. She wasn't just mean, she was something else entirely. The kind of woman who could freeze your soul with a glance. Always hunched over, muttering things under her breath, stuff you couldn't understand. She'd have these fits. She'd start shouting and breaking things. But it wasn't just her temper. It was the way she looked at you, like she was studying you, deciding something about you. And then there were the rumors. Rumors, I pressed. People said Lydia had been old for as long as anyone could remember. Like she didn't age the way normal folks did. But back then, folks were superstitious, always talking nonsense about witches and curses. I didn't think much of it not until years later. It was a night just like this, he began, his voice low and steady. Rain pouring down, thunder rumbling in the distance. I was about your age, Tommy. Just a dumb kid who thought the scariest thing in the world was a big spider. I didn't know any better. He paused, rubbing his hands together as if trying to shake off the chill of a memory. I woke up to Henry standing at the foot of my bed. Scared the hell out of me too. I didn't even hear him come in, just opened my eyes and there he was, soaking wet from the rain. How did he even get in? Greg asked. That's what I asked him, Uncle Dale said. But he wouldn't answer. Just kept saying I had to get up, had to leave town right now. I thought he was pulling some prank or something, but then I saw his face. He was serious, more serious than I'd ever seen him. I told him my parents were out at their dance class and would be back soon. That's when he grabbed my arm and said something I'll never forget. He said, "They're not at dance class, Dale, it's all a lie." Me and the others exchanged uneasy looks. Dance class. That's what our parents had told us too. I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. Uncle Dale continued, but he looked terrified. I told him he was scaring me, and he said, "You should be scared. If you don't leave town tonight, you're going to die like everyone else." The room fell silent except for the crackle of the lantern. I didn't know what to believe, Uncle Dale said, but I could see in his eyes that he wasn't joking. So I went with him. We got into his car and drove out into the rain. I noticed Henry had packed it up. Blankets, food, clothes. It wasn't just some wild idea. He'd been planning this. Henry wouldn't let me drive through town. He kept us on back roads, barely lit, barely traveled. And then about halfway out of town, I saw it. I tensed. It looked human at first, Uncle Dale said, but as the headlights hit it, I could see the way it moved. The skin. Dark, oily, its limbs were too long, its joints all wrong. I hit the brakes so hard we almost skidded off the road. "A lurker," Tommy whispered. Uncle Dale nodded grimly, but here's the thing. It didn't attack us. I was panicking, telling Henry we needed to turn around. But he just got out of the car. I yelled at him to stop, but he wouldn't listen. He walked right up to it. "What happened?" I asked. Uncle Dale's voice dropped. It looked at him and then it backed off. Just slinked away into the trees like some trained dog. That's when Henry turned to me and said, "They won't touch me." I shivered at the thought. He started talking after that. Uncle Dale continued, told me everything. About his family, how they weren't normal, how they'd never been normal. He said it all went back to his grandmother Lydia. She wasn't just some cranky old woman, she was the one who started it all. "Started what?" Greg asked. "The cult," Uncle Dale said. "She was the one who brought everyone together. She convinced them it was for protection, for prosperity. But it wasn't just prayers they were offering. Every 18 years they'd leave their kids behind while they went to their so-called dance class. Only it wasn't a dance class. It was a cult." The group froze. Henry had only learned about it recently at that time. Uncle Dale explained. He'd overheard something he wasn't supposed to, and when he confronted his parents, they didn't deny it. They just tried to convince him to go along with it, to carry on the family legacy. But he refused. Uncle Dale continued, and he tried to save me, told me to take the car and leave town. I begged him to come with me, but he wouldn't. He said he had to stay behind, to find out what was really going on and stop it if he could. That's when we parted ways. The room was so quiet that the ticking of Uncle Dale's watch sounded like thunder. But that's obviously not where it ends, he said finally. It was years later, after the army, after everything I saw over there. I just wanted to settle down. A normal life. I met Beth, married her, and figured we'd find somewhere quiet to start over. Clearbrook, it popped into my head, and I don't know why I even thought of it. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe guilt. Hell, maybe I just needed answers. Tommy shifted in his seat and Uncle Dale caught it. I know what you're thinking. Why come back here, right? I ask myself that every damn day. He sighed. But I did. Beth and I moved here and I didn't tell her, didn't tell anyone about what happened that night. I thought it was done. His voice cracked just barely, but he swallowed it down. The town looked good, better than I remembered, and when I found out Henry was mayor, I felt relieved. Thought maybe he'd really fix things, you know. So I went to see him. Uncle Dale leaned back, shaking his head with a bitter smile. I'll tell you this much. Seeing him again after all those years, it felt right. We hugged, laughed, caught up on life like nothing ever happened. But it did happen, and I couldn't let it go. So I asked him, point blank, what the hell happened that night? Henry told me everything, or at least I thought he did. Said after I left it got bad, real bad. Friends died. Some of the town too. He told me his grandmother, Lydia, was into some dark stuff. Occultism, rituals, curses, the whole 9 yards. Said she cursed the family, cursed the town, and he broke it. Or so he said. Tommy flinched. I believed him, Dale said, voice sharper now. I wanted to believe him. I was so damn relieved to hear it was over. He even took me out to the graveyard, showed me our parents' graves, told me how they died cleaning up the mess. Said some of the townsfolk were still believers, but they handled it. Made it sound like a clean break. Greg shifted uncomfortably. And you bought that? I had to, Uncle Dale snapped. Then his voice softened. I had to. You don't know what it's like living such a life, leaving everyone behind at a young age. I needed it to be over. The room went quiet again. But it wasn't. He looked at me, then Tommy. One night Beth hands me this letter. Says Henry sent it, inviting us to a dance class. Tommy's face went pale and we all exchanged worried glances. Beth knew something was wrong. Could see it all over me, but I didn't tell her. I just said I had to talk to Henry and that I'd explain when I got back. He paused, staring at the floor like it might open up and swallow him. I found Henry, confronted him, threw the damn letter at him and demanded answers. And that's when I saw it. He wasn't the same Henry I grew up with. His face, the way he smiled, cold, like he was looking through me. Uncle Dale clenched his fists. He told me the truth, or at least the part he wanted me to know. He never broke the curse, because to him it wasn't a curse, it was power, control. He said those creatures, the lurkers, the darklings as he called them, they weren't just monsters. The people in this town are divided in 3 factions, immune, lurker, and survivor. Immune? Greg asked. Every 18 years, those who have been infected turn into lurkers, he said. The people who are either immune or lucky enough to survive the last time gather around in the church. The children of each parent are left behind. Those who survive or are even immune can come to church next time. Those who are infected stay in the city, and as soon as it gets dark, they transform. Their job is to infect and hunt. So there is a possibility that one of these creatures you encountered was even one of your parents. "No way," Kev shouted. Uncle Dale just kept going, his voice shaking now. He also told me his grandmother, Lydia, was still alive. Barely aging, said she's the source of it all. Like a brood mother, keeping the cycle going, and he wasn't stopping with this town. He wanted more darklings, more control. He had everyone in his pocket. The law, the council, even the damn church. Tommy's voice broke through. "And he just told you all of this?" Uncle Dale nodded. "Said I'd be his right hand. Help him. Said we could be kings." "What did you say?" Tommy asked. "I said no," Uncle Dale snapped. "Told him to stop it before it went too far. But he just laughed and said it was already too late." He paused, his voice barely above a whisper. "So I ran home." The room fell deathly silent. "When I got home, I found Beth shot, dead on the floor. I couldn't save her, since I refused his offer. He took her from me." Dale's voice cracked, and he had to take a moment. "I knew I couldn't fight Henry alone, not with those things. Not with Lydia still out there keeping the curse alive. So I packed up, sold everything I had, and moved out to the farm, off the grid." "Why didn't you just leave?" He looked up at Uncle Dale, his face hard but his voice trembling. "If you knew all of this, about the town, about Henry, why didn't you just pack up and get the hell out of here?" Uncle Dale hesitated. For the first time since he started talking, he looked nervous, like he didn't want to say what came next. "Why I never left," he finally said, looking Tommy in the eye. "Well, I wanted to leave, but I just couldn't. He took my Beth from me. There was no way I was going to leave without taking my revenge." Uncle Dale paused for a moment before he spoke up again. "And I couldn't leave because of you, Tommy." Tommy blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" Uncle Dale swallowed hard. "Tommy, I'm not your real uncle." The room went dead quiet. Tommy froze, like the words hit him before he could even process them. "What?" "I'm not your uncle," Uncle Dale repeated, softer this time. "Not by blood." Tommy stood up so fast his chair nearly fell over. "What the hell does that mean?" Uncle Dale sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "It means you were left with me, Tommy. Someone brought you to me, your real mom." Tommy took a shaky step back. "My what?" No, you can't just... What are you even saying right now?" Uncle Dale's voice softened, but the words still felt like bricks. "A year after the night I lost Beth, a young woman showed up at my door. She had you in her arms, just a baby, and she begged me to take you in." Tommy's knees felt weak. Me and the others stared in stunned silence, but no one knew what to say. She knew what this town was, what it could do to you, and she wanted to protect you. She couldn't keep you safe herself, not with everything going on, so she left you with me. She sent money, visited as much as she could. But when you got older, she stopped coming around. She was ashamed, Tommy. She couldn't face you." Tommy's voice cracked. "Who is she?" Uncle Dale froze again, but there was no point in holding back now. "Heather Kane, Henry's sister." Tommy's eyes widened. "No!" "She's your mother, Tommy." "No!" Tommy shouted, backing away. "No, that's not possible. What about my father then? After he found out she was pregnant, he just left. He couldn't take the burden of raising a child in a town like this." Tommy shook his head. pacing like he could walk away from the truth. No, this doesn't make any sense. I'm sorry, Uncle Dale said, his voice raw. I didn't want to lie to you, but I had to keep you safe. I stayed here because of you. I couldn't leave you behind, not with her still in this town. Tommy stopped pacing and turned to face him. Uncle Dale nodded. She is against them, and she was trying to protect you. She loves you and she is very sorry about everything. The room was dead silent after Uncle Dale's revelation. No one knew what to say, especially Tommy, who had stormed off without another word. Uncle Dale stood up, already moving to follow him. Tommy, wait. Just let me explain more. Before he could get any farther, Kev grabbed his shoulder, holding him back. Dale, don't, Kev said quietly. Just give him some time. He needs space, I added. Let him process this. Uncle Dale's shoulders slumped, his eyes darting toward the hallway where Tommy disappeared. I didn't mean to hurt him. I thought I was protecting him. We get it, Greg interrupted gently, but you can't fix it right now. Let him breathe. Reluctantly, Uncle Dale sank back into his chair. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and ran a hand on his face. No one spoke for a while. The only sound was the faint hum of the old house settling and the distant rumble of thunder outside. Uncle Dale rubbed his hands together like he was trying to wipe something dirty off them. There's something I didn't tell you earlier, about the lurkers. Of course there is, Greg muttered under his breath. Uncle Dale shot him a look but kept talking. The infection doesn't take hold all at once. At first, they're halfway there. Still human, but not really. Their bodies start to change. Yellow eyes, teeth, and claws. They're weaker at first, but don't let that fool you. That's when they're at their most dangerous, because they know what they're doing. What do you mean? Ashley asked. I mean they're still smart, Uncle Dale said. Smart enough to trick you, trap you, and the worst part. He paused, letting the weight of it sink in. Some can still talk. A chill ran through the room. They're already turning, but they sound just like anyone else, Uncle Dale said. That's how they get close enough to spit that black sludge and infect you. Jeez, Kev muttered. But then, Uncle Dale continued, they evolve. The infection takes over completely. They stop looking human. They bulk up, get faster, stronger, and that's when they stop infecting and just hunt. Because by then, anyone who's still alive isn't worth the trouble of infecting. They're just prey. I clenched my fists. Does that mean that one of the infected was on the 3rd floor hiding while everyone was partying? Uncle Dale nodded. Most likely. But you can bet there are more out there that aren't in the early stage anymore. The group fell silent again, the weight of it all hitting us like a sledgehammer. After a moment, I stood up and motioned to Kev and Greg. Come on, I said, let's check on Tommy. Uncle Dale looked up at us. Tell him I'm sorry. I nodded, we will. The 3 of us headed towards Tommy's room, leaving the others behind in the dimly lit kitchen. The creak of the floorboards followed us down the hall, and when we reached Tommy's door, I knocked gently. Tommy, it's us. No answer. I glanced at Kev and Greg before trying the handle. It turned. Tommy. I pushed the door open slowly. Inside, Tommy sat on the edge of the bed staring at the floor. His shoulders were slumped and his eyes were red, but there were no tears left. He looked up at us, his face hard but tired. The room was quiet except for the soft creak of the old floorboards as we eased our way into Tommy's room. He was still sitting on the edge of the bed, shoulders slumped, staring blankly at the floor. His face was pale and his knuckles were white from how tightly his hands were clasped together. Kev took a small step closer. Your uncle, Dale. He's sorry, man. He didn't mean to drop all that on you like that. Tommy's head snapped up, his eyes sharp. He's not my uncle. The words came out bitter, almost venomous, and hung in the air like a slap to the face. That's when Greg suddenly snapped. Are you serious right now? Tommy flinched, clearly not expecting Greg to lash out. No, seriously, Greg continued, stepping closer. Not your uncle. Then who the hell has been taking care of you your whole life, huh? Who fixed your bike when you smashed it into a tree? Who gave you that pocket knife you have been carrying all these years? Tommy's mouth opened to respond, but Greg wasn't done. And let's not forget the times you screwed up, like that time you stole beer from Mr. Langston's garage. Remember that? Most parents would have grounded you for weeks, but Dale, he just made you clean out his tool shed and called it even. Didn't even yell at you because he cares. Tommy looked down again, his hand shaking slightly. Kev stepped forward next. His tone was softer, but his words hit just as hard. Greg's right, man. My dad would have smacked me upside the head if I had pulled half the crap you did. And Casey's. Don't even get me started. I gave a small nod, confirming it. But Dale, he stuck with you, Kev said, every damn time. He didn't have to. He could have just given you over to someone else or, I don't know, left town like he said he was gonna, but he didn't. Greg chimed back in. And don't forget, dude, he raised you knowing what this place is, knowing what could happen if people found out. He stayed. For you. Tommy's breathing hitched slightly, but he stayed silent. Then I crouched down in front of him so he couldn't avoid eye contact. Look, man, we're all messed up right now. This night, it's hell. And finding out about your mom, about Dale. I get it, it's a lot. Tommy swallowed hard but didn't speak. But here's the thing, I went on. We've got nobody left, not our parents, not our teachers, not the police, no one. It's just us. And yeah, Dale might not be your real uncle, but he's more than that, man. Dale is your father. There was a long pause. Then Tommy sniffled and rubbed his eyes quickly, but it was no use. Tears were already forming. He let out a shaky breath and finally whispered, You guys are such assholes. Greg smirked. Yeah, we know. Kev grinned and patted his shoulder. But we're your assholes. And just like that, Tommy broke. The tears came faster, and before anyone could say another word, the four of us collapsed into a group hug. Tommy clung to us, his shoulders shaking as the weight of everything finally hit him all at once. We are brothers, Kev said, all of us. What none of us noticed at first was the figure standing in the doorway. Uncle Dale had been there the whole time, silently watching. His eyes were glassy and his jaw was clenched as he tried to keep it together. When Tommy finally pulled away from the hug, he looked up and saw Dale standing there. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Tommy wiped his face, stood up, and crossed the room. Uncle Dale opened his mouth, but Tommy didn't let him speak. He just stepped forward and threw his arms around him. I'm sorry, Tommy whispered. Uncle Dale froze, caught off guard, but then his arms came around Tommy, holding him tight. I'm sorry too, kid. I'm so damn sorry. The rest of us stepped back, giving them the moment they needed. When they finally pulled apart, Uncle Dale clapped Tommy on the shoulder. We're gonna figure this out, Dale said firmly. Together. Tommy nodded. Yeah, together. I looked at the group and took a deep breath. All right, let's hash out a plan. They all nodded. The weight of the night still heavy but now tempered by something stronger. Resolve.